They called me the Water Girl. Copper Ridge, Utah, high cliffs, no cover, every angle a killing floor. I carried a sidearm, a map, and the burden of being overlooked. That morning, the sky was clear enough to see every scrape on the sandstone. We just cleared a narrow pass when the gunfire started, clean, rehearsed, practiced. An ambush. Sniper fire cut down the echo line, precise and indifferent. We dropped to the dirt. The radios spit nothing but static. And then I saw him. High on the ridge, half-shadowed, scope glinting just enough for me to catch the flash. My pulse didn't rise. I'd mapped that ridge in my notebook the night before. I'd traced the wind currents, measured the drift patterns. I'd made a mark right where he knelt. I didn't think. I drew my sidearm, sighted him through the haze, and squeezed once. One shot. The sound snapped different than the rifles. Smaller. Dismissible. But when the echo faded, no return fire came. No more shots from above. The squad leader turned back, face smudged with dirt and disbelief. Who the hell fired that? A corporal muttered from the dust. Maddie Keller. The Water Girl. That name stuck to me like burrs in a sock. But there's a story in the shadows of that title. I'll tell it. Maybe then you'll understand. I wasn't built for war. Not by their standards. Light frame, pale skin that refused to tan. Hair the color of sand left out too long. They said I was logistics. A tag, a function, carry water, distribute medkits, check ropes, mark supply caches. I did that well enough. But at night, when the platoon snored under those heavy desert skies, I studied. Sat by my lamp, flipping through old field manuals, sketching terrain in my notebook. I tracked wind shifts, measured echo travel, drew lines like I was tracing constellations. I'd clean their optics when no one asked, tightened scopes with hands steadier than most realized. No one noticed how I handled my sidearm, how I tilted it, checked refractions off the chamber. That wasn't part of my job, so they never looked close. They joked easy. The extra mule. The gauze girl. Some meant no harm, others did. But I carried that quiet. Silence was something I'd learned to wield. In debriefs, I watched maps fill with red lines I knew were wrong. But they talked over me, voices loud with certainty. I stayed quiet, then mapped the correct angles after lights out. There were patterns in sound if you knew where to listen. Places where echoes survived when bullets didn't. Only one man ever paused to ask. A sergeant passing by while I checked the ridge reflections. Where'd you learn to read angles like that? I told him. Places where echoes survive when bullets don't. He just nodded like he half understood. He didn't ask again. Then came the day they found my notebook. Someone poking through my pack found the charts, wind data, ballistic math, ridge schematics. They passed it around like a secret. Who writes this shit if they don't use it? One of them said. Still I said nothing. Because if I spoke, I'd have to explain Narvik Ridge. The cold. The silence. The 74 ghosts with my name written on their passing. But I wasn't ready for that. Not yet. I remember the night we pushed into Copper Ridge. The air hung tight between the cliffs, like sound itself was holding its breath. Every footstep echoed twice, once forward, once behind. I kept count of every repeat, every shift in echo. That was my duty after all. The Water Girl. The mule. The extra shadow. No one noticed I wasn't watching just for thirst. I was listening for ghosts. The squad moved forward casual, half believing they'd cleared the ridge weeks ago. But I knew better. I'd seen the scrape marks up on the rock, fresh, too clean. Someone had been setting positions. Scopes. Vantage points. No one asked me. No one ever did. When the shot broke, first one then two, the squad scattered. The designated marksman was too far forward, pinned. Radios jammed, the air like syrup, thick and useless. I remember lying flat, cheek against the dirt, watching the sun slide off the cliff edge. That's when I saw him. Not clearly. Just the gleam, the unnatural glint of optics catching stray light. My hand went to my sidearm before thought caught up. I tilted my wrist, the angle compensating for wind I'd charted the night before. A half breath in, I fired once. Just once. The sound barely echoed. It was a pistol after all. The squad leader barked, confused. Then silence stretched wide and deep across the canyon. The firing stopped. No return fire. No counter-sniper sweep needed. When we regrouped, their eyes fell on me like I'd grown another head. What the hell was that? My voice stayed steady. Target on the ridge. He's down. A pause. The kind of silence that weighs more than noise. Harlow, our platoon leader, walked over, dirt and sweat streaking his face. Where'd you learn to shoot like that? His voice wasn't angry, just searching. I met his eyes. NATO Alpine Ops. 3 tours. 74 confirmed. That stopped everything. You what? NATO? That doesn't add up. I nodded once. Discharged after an IED. Hearing loss. He stared hard. Something in his eyes cracked. Not anger but recollection. Like a memory he'd been trying to place. Then under his breath. Narvik Ridge. You were on Narvik. I said nothing. Just held his gaze. He whispered again, quieter, like he was speaking to himself. The ghost of Narvik. That was you. The others looked between us, the pieces slotting into place, their easy jokes suddenly hollow. They'd all heard of the ghost. The sniper no one saw, the shadow who dropped an entire incursion unit without being spotted. The myth that wasn't a man. They never imagined it had been a woman. Or that she'd be hauling their canteens and checking their medkits. I stood, brushing dust from my uniform, my sidearm still warm at my side. I'm not here for stories, I told them. I'm here to make sure you all come back. Harlow just nodded, slow and thoughtful. He didn't need more. The facts had already arrived. Things changed after that. They didn't joke about the water girl anymore. No more sideways glances, no more half-muttered remarks when I unrolled my maps at night. A week later, Harlow asked me to the range. Not as a shooter, he said. As an instructor. I shrugged. You sure they'll listen? He smiled, tired but genuine. They'd be fools not to. So I taught them. Quietly. No lectures, just small corrections, a grip adjusted here, a breathing pattern there. I showed them how to use reflections on stone to measure angle spread. How to read wind not just by feel but by watching the dust rise off a ridge lip. I never raised my voice. I never needed to. One private, green as grass, scratched something into a wooden post outside our range. The water girl. Only one who didn't flinch. That was enough. During briefings, the squad leader started asking, Keller, how's our sight lines? Keller, what ridge would you pick? Each time I'd answer without drama. I wasn't performing. I was ensuring their return. And they started listening. When we moved through difficult passes, I led. Not loud, not formally, but my steps were watched. When I paused, they paused. When I changed pace, they shifted. They trusted I heard things they didn't. Because I did. Because once your hearing is half gone, your eyes and your instincts get sharper. You learn to listen to what the land tells you when your ears can't. Harlow made it official after a while. Team Eyes, he called me. Not a rank. Just a fact. And in war, facts matter more than ranks. There was a night, near the end of our deployment, when a storm blew in over Copper Ridge. The rain came hard and mean, washing the dust from the rocks like old blood from a wound. We huddled in a shallow alcove, the cold threading through every seam. A young corporal, maybe 19, stared at my pistol as I cleaned it. The same one I'd fired that day on the ridge. You ever miss? He asked. I paused. The rain tapped steady on my helmet. I looked at him and said, only once. He didn't ask more. He didn't need to. Some truths don't carry well in words. But I remember it. The one I missed. A shot fired too early in Norway, a breath miscounted. The man got away and someone else paid the price. A good man. A friend. I carry that with me still. The weight is quiet, but it never leaves. That's why I don't miss now. That's why I was the last line of defense they didn't see coming. Because every bullet is a memory. And I refused to add another ghost to my tally. When we left Copper Ridge, I didn't say goodbye. I packed my things, rolled my maps tight, holstered my sidearm, and waited for the helicopter. As I climbed in, Harlow caught my arm. Thank you, he said simply. No fanfare. I nodded. Make sure they remember the way home. I will, he promised. And I believed him. Because some men learn what precision really means, not in the shot but in the knowing when to take it. And sometimes, who should? They say war marks you, but it's not always scars or the way you walk after. Sometimes it's how you're remembered or how you aren't. I returned from Copper Ridge without ceremony. My discharge papers were already waiting. No briefing, no medals, just a signature and a closed door. My hearing was deemed degraded beyond acceptable thresholds for active sharpshooters. They said nothing of the 74, nothing of Narvik, nothing of the ridge where one bullet had saved an entire patrol. Instead, they handed me a clipboard. Logistics tech, they said. Support roles suit you now. And because the body follows orders even when the soul doesn't, I signed. I told myself it didn't matter. That the maps I drew, the wind charts, the training sessions, I could still do all that. I could still serve in the shadows if I had to. But there was no mistaking what I'd become in their eyes. A carrier. A background figure. The one behind the wire when the bullets started. So I became the water girl. Quiet, capable, invisible. Yet there was something they couldn't take. The eyes stay sharp when the ears go dim. And in silence, things become clearer. You feel the world differently. The tremors beneath your boots. The shift in wind like a spoken warning. The tension of a rifle raised somewhere unseen. I didn't need sound to know where danger sat. I only needed the map in my head and the pressure in my bones. After Copper Ridge, something changed in the unit. They didn't see me the same way. The nicknames stopped. No one called me Mule or Gauze Girl anymore. I became Keller. They asked, not ordered, for my input. Where would you set up Overwatch, Keller? Which ridge carries the best line of retreat? It wasn't approval. It wasn't affection. It was reliance. And for a soldier, that's the highest form of respect. Still, there were places I kept to myself. At night, while others slept, I'd redraw the same cliffs again and again, tracing paths with my fingertip, recalculating wind shifts by the time of night. I kept my sidearm close. I oiled it until the mechanism whispered smoother than silk. I didn't intend to fire again. But if I did, I wanted the shot to speak truer than my voice ever could. Once, a private asked why I cleaned a pistol meant for emergencies with the same care as a sniper rifle. I told him, every bullet is a question. You better know the answer before you pull the trigger. He didn't understand. Few do. A rifle sings. A pistol asks. And the answers don't come easy. Mine never did. They say Narvik Ridge was a ghost story. A single shooter, hidden in snow and shadow, eliminating an entire assault line one by one. No one ever saw the shooter, but bodies fell in the white quiet like dominoes toppling. They called that shooter the ghost of Narvik. They imagined a phantom, a myth. Some whispered it was a man who could see sound itself. No one guessed it was a woman with half-hearing, cold fingers, and eyes trained to catch the smallest tremor in a horizon line. It was me. I didn't want them to know. Not then. Some truths are better when left unspoken. When the myth does the work memory refuses to do. But Harlow knew. And when he said it aloud, the squad believed. They treated me differently after. Still no fanfare. Still no parades. Just a quiet weight behind every glance. Every question posed to me before a movement. Like they knew now that the water girl might just see the bullet before it flies. I remember one night in particular. We'd set up a temporary bivouac in a narrow cleft in the ridge. The wind funneled through there, making the rocks hum like distant machinery. I'd charted the hum, knew it would carry any noise straight back to an enemy's ear. So I made them reposition. Moved every piece of kit, every person 15 meters back where the rock absorbed sound. A private grumbled about the extra effort. Harlow shut him down quick. If Keller says move, you move. That night, the wind carried voices, soft, indistinct, but there. Scouts from the opposing force, passing just beyond earshot. If we'd stayed put, they'd have heard us. I didn't need to say, I told you so. My maps had already spoken. A week before extraction, Harlow asked me directly, why'd they shelve you? Someone with your record? I looked him dead on. Because I can't hear right. That's it? I nodded. They said that's enough. He spat on the dirt, angry on my behalf. But I wasn't. Don't pity me, Harlow, I said. My ears went, but my eyes didn't. He smiled at that, but it was sad around the edges. You ever miss it? The rifle, I mean. I didn't answer right away. I missed the certainty, yes. The feel of calculation of the world narrowing down to just angle, breadth, and distance. But I didn't miss the ghosts. I miss knowing I was the last shot anyone would hear. I finally said. But not what came after. He understood. Or he pretended to. That was enough. By the end of the rotation, They'd stopped seeing me as support. Keller, take point on the ridge. Keller, eyes on the west slope. I wasn't the water girl anymore. I was the rifle they never saw coming. And when we flew out, when the helicopter lifted off and Copper Ridge shrank beneath us, I looked out the window, listening to nothing but the pressure in my chest. I'd left the place quieter than I found it. Sometimes that's all a soldier can do. I didn't expect a legacy. When you leave war, the dust follows you, sure. But the names, the acts, they stay behind, caught in after-action reports and fading recollections. I told myself that was fine. Better to be unknown and alive than remembered with flowers on a stone. But Copper Ridge wouldn't forget. A month after rotation, I was back stateside, reassigned to a supply depot, Wyoming, flat and endless. I moved crates, logged manifests, signed papers with names I didn't recognize. My pistol stayed locked in a box under my bunk. No one asked about it. Then one day an envelope arrived, no return address. Inside was a photo, grainy black and white but clear enough. It showed a ridgeline. At the peak, someone had etched in chalk, "The water girl marks the way." No signature, but I knew who had sent it. Harlow's handwriting on the back. They still ask where to stand. We still ask Keller. I sat with that picture for a long time. I didn't keep many possessions. My hearing aids, my maps, the sidearm, the old notebook, they traveled with me, even when I rotated between bases. Every now and then, a younger recruit would ask why a logistics tech carried a sidearm with that kind of care. I'd shrug. Old habit. They'd sometimes press, expecting a story, but I wouldn't give them one. Stories have weight, and I already carried mine. But the truth? I didn't keep the pistol for protection. I kept it because it was the only thing that still felt exact in my hands. A rifle is a long question, a study in patience. A sidearm is a decision. Quick. Measured. You don't clean decisions for sentiment. You clean them because the next one matters. One evening during inventory closeout, a visiting lieutenant stopped by. Fresh, polished, trying too hard to look casual. "You Keller?" I nodded, still sorting canisters. "You were at Copper Ridge?" I nodded again. He looked around like confirming no one else was close. Then his voice dropped. "I was part of Delta Squad. Heard about what you did. They talk about it different now. They say you saw the sniper before anyone else could." I didn't correct him. He shifted, uncertain. "They say you're the ghost of Narvik." I didn't correct that either. He waited, as if expecting me to confirm, to own the legend. I kept counting the crates. Finally he left, awkward and unresolved. I didn't want his reverence. I didn't want his awe. What I wanted was for him to go back and make sure his squad watched the ridges. That was always the point. There's a silence that comes after war. Not peace, just a quieter kind of waiting. I tried civilian life for a while. A small cabin in rural Wyoming, close enough to see the Tetons when the sun angled right. I walked the ridgelines there, old reflexes steering my steps to the highest ground, eyes tracing wind movement through the pines. You can't stop reading terrain once you've learned. The land talks if you listen right. I'd mark trees with chalk, not for battle but to remember. Here's the high point, here's where echoes die. Some nights I'd sit on my porch with the sidearm stripped down, cleaning it by lamplight. I wasn't waiting for anyone, but I wanted it ready just the same. Then one winter the call came. It was Harlow's voice on the line, rougher than I remembered but still sharp. "We're running drills next month," he said. "They want better overwatch techniques." I waited for the ask. "You'll come instruct, right?" I hesitated. "I'm not active duty." "You're Keller. That's active enough." I almost smiled at that. When I arrived at the training site, the young ones eyed me with that mix of curiosity and skepticism. A woman with half-hearing, no rank insignia, walking with a map case and a sidearm, not what they'd expect from a shooting instructor. They listened anyway. I taught them how to see the ridge before the ridge sees you, how to read dust, how to time breath with wind breaks, how to calculate angle drift by watching the sway of grass against rock. I never showed them the pistol. I didn't need to. But on the final day, one private asked, "Ma'am, do you ever miss?" I looked him straight on. "Only once. It's always only once. Enough to remember. Enough to keep you humble." When I left the range, Harlow met me at the perimeter. You know, they'll never call you Water Girl again, he said. I nodded. I was never her anyway. We stood there watching the sun die behind the hills. You still keep that notebook? He asked. Every day, I said. He smiled faintly. Then they'll always come home. I didn't have an answer for that. Some truths don't need affirming. But I carried the notebook still. Pages filled with wind charts, echoes, and the silent knowledge of what it means to be the last line no one sees coming. That's legacy enough for me. There are things I never wrote in the notebook. I charted angles, wind patterns, pressure drops. I marked every ridge I'd ever walked, every crevice that could swallow a man unseen. But I never recorded their names. The 74. I knew every face, but I kept their names here, Tap's chest, because pages rot. Memory, even when half-deaf, holds longer. Some nights I'd sit alone with the notebook open, blank page staring up. And still I'd resist writing them down. Because if I did, it would make them a tally. I wasn't a counter. I was their consequence. That's a weight you carry without ceremony. Years later, I was sitting in a small mess hall outside Fort Carson. A young corporal sat opposite me, too polite to ask directly but too curious to hide it. Finally he said, "Is it true what they say? That you dropped a sniper at Copper Ridge with a sidearm?" I kept eating. The eggs were cold, the coffee worse, but I'd learned to appreciate bad meals. They're honest. He waited, and when I didn't answer he tried again. They said it was one shot. They say you didn't even aim. Just knew. I looked at him finally. One shot. Because that's all it should ever take. His eyes widened. But how do you? I let the silence answer. Because if I said more, I'd have to explain that I'd spent every night before that mapping wind corridors, plotting echoes, memorizing the light's behavior on that rock face. It wasn't magic. It was preparation. The kind of work no one pays attention to when you're the one hauling water and gauze. I stood to leave, finishing the last bitter sip of coffee. Before I walked off, I told him, "Firearms are for the loud. Eyes are for the prepared. You want to come home, train your eyes." Harlow kept in touch after the training cycle. Every few months I'd get a letter, sometimes a call. Updates. His squad had started charting terrain the way I taught them. Some of them kept notebooks of their own. One time, his letter ended with, "We're not scared of the ridges anymore. We have eyes now. We have Keller's sightlines." I folded that letter and kept it in my pocket for weeks, until the ink started to smudge, because I wasn't anyone's leader. But if my eyes could be borrowed, then maybe the ridges wouldn't take as many. That's all I ever wanted. Years passed, but soldiers find each other. At a reunion, not official, just a gathering of the old patrol, I stood by the perimeter watching them catch up. Laughter, handshakes, beer traded like old currency. I didn't join the center. I wasn't the center. But one of them, the corporal who'd once called me Mule, walked over. He had gray at his temples now. Time softens all of us. He said nothing for a while, just stood beside me, eyes on the horizon where the sun was dipping. Then, I wrote my own notebook after Copper Ridge. I looked at him surprised. He wasn't the type I'd imagined would. He smiled a little sheepish. Didn't want to be blind again. Learned that from you. He didn't apologize for what he'd called me. Didn't need to. Some debts settle not with words, but with actions carried forward. There's a clearing behind my cabin now where I stack stones. Not gravestones, just markers. For every ridge I've crossed, every echo I've mapped. 74 stones. One for each shot. I don't tell visitors what they are. No one asks. But when the wind runs through the pines just right, the stones hum faintly. Like the ridge is remembering too. I sit with that sound sometimes, letting it fill the space my hearing can't. It's not peace, but it's a kind of presence. A reminder that I was there. That I saw. And that maybe somewhere someone else is watching the ridges now, notebook in hand, pistol cleaned, eyes open. That's enough. Sometimes when the wind was just still enough I could hear the past. Not with my ears, those betrayed me years ago, but with the hollows in my bones. Memories don't echo like sound does. They vibrate differently. They sit in the marrow. That winter the snow came late but heavy. I spent days inside the cabin, notebook open, my sidearm dismantled on the table. Cleaning it became ritual the way some folks light candles. Every groove wiped, every spring checked twice. I never needed it, but that wasn't the point. One afternoon a letter arrived. No return address, but the handwriting, tight, squared letters, belonged to Harlow. I opened it slow like it might break. Inside a short note. Keller. The rookies still ask about Copper Ridge. Still asking how we made it back. I told them the truth. We had you. Thought you should know you're still our last line. Even from here. H. There was a second sheet folded twice. A list of names. Not of the dead, of the living. The ones who'd come home. Names I hadn't memorized, but faces I hadn't forgotten. I sat with that list in my lap for hours. The stove burned low, the snow gathered thick on the windows, but I didn't move. I just read the names over and over the same way I used to read wind speeds and distance markers. Because that was my count now. Not 74, but 38. 38 returned. The others, not my fault, but still mine to carry. That spring, I agreed to return for a new cycle of combat drills. Fort Carson again. Same range, same hesitation in the fresh eyes watching me. A woman older, hearing half gone, no rifle, just a notebook and a sidearm. But by the third day, they weren't watching the pistol anymore. They watched my hands trace terrain on the map. They watched how I marked ridgelines, predicted crossfire zones before we even walked them. Somewhere between the fourth and fifth session, one of the young sergeants asked, "Did you ever teach officially? Like, train snipers?" I shook my head. No, I just survived. Another soldier asked, "But how do you see it? Before it happens?" I paused. Then I told them, "Because I spent more time looking than speaking. The land shows you if you watch long enough." They nodded, but I knew most wouldn't understand until it was too late. That's how it is. Experience is a language that only sounds loud when you've already lived its silence. The night before I was due to leave, Harlow found me sitting by the range boundary. He sat down, knees creaking. "They asked for you again," he said. "Who?" "The brass. They want you on the official training cadre. Said your methods. Produce." I smiled faintly. "They mean it saves bodies." "Exactly." I looked up at the stars. My hearing couldn't catch their hush, but I imagined the old sky songs. "Not sure I'm the teaching type," I said. Harlow shook his head. "You're the eyes they'll never have without you." We sat quiet a while. Then he added, "We called you Water Girl. That was small of us." I didn't correct him. He already knew. "But you know what?" he continued. "They write your name in every debrief now. Every map has Keller's Ridge marked on it. That shot you took, they still teach it. As the example of the shot you don't expect." I kept my gaze forward. "Doesn't matter if they remember my name." "It does," he said. "Because it reminds them that some rifles are human." That line stayed with me. Some rifles are human. I left the base the next day, back to my cabin, back to the clearing of stones. But when I got home, something was different. At the base of the largest stone, someone had placed a single strip of cloth. Faded army green with my name stitched faintly in black. Keller M. No note. No footprints left in the thawed mud. But I knew. Someone had come. Maybe Harlow. Maybe one of the squad. Or maybe just someone paying respect to a rifle they'd never seen. I left it there. It belonged among the stones. Because some names don't need carving. A simple cloth, a mark of presence, that's enough. I still don't know how long I'll keep teaching. My hearing fades more each year. My eyes sharpen, but even that has limits. Time is the ridge none of us cross. But while I'm here, I'll keep showing them. How to see before they hear. How to mark the echo before the shot. How to be the last line when no one else is watching. Because I was never the water girl. I was the one who carried the return. And because of me, some still come home. That's my tally. That's my aim. I live quiet now. Most days pass with the weight of wind and wood smoke. I keep to the ridgelines near my cabin, still tracing echo patterns in my head. Not because anyone's coming, but because I can't forget how. And because forgetting is a kind of death I'm not ready for. Sometimes new recruits visit. Harlow sends them, ones who ask too many questions, ones who think killing is an art of noise and speed. They show up unsure of who they'll find. They see a woman, hair gray at the edges, hearing half gone, eyes still sharp. They expect stories. I give them maps instead. I show them where sound breaks, where sightlines disappear, where cover betrays. I don't give them the 74. I don't give them Narvik. Those aren't lessons. Those are weights. Mine to carry, not theirs. But before they leave, I remind them. You won't always hear the last line of defense. But it's there. Watching. Some nod, some don't understand. But they remember. You can see it in the way they watch the ridges on their walk back down. That's enough. The cloth strip still rests at the stone pile. The stitching is fading, but the name remains. Keller M. I don't need a marker beyond that. Because those who needed me remember. And those who don't. They never saw me anyway. I was never the water girl. I was the rifle no one saw coming. And because of that, some made it home. That's all. That's everything.